Aloha, folks. My name is Chelsea Arnott. I work with the Department of Land and Natural Resources and also program support for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. Thank you for joining us today for this informational webinar on the funding process and application guidelines for FY24 HISC call for proposals. I have with me today Chuck Chimera, who's going to help just tech assistance and manage the chat box. So this is set up as a meeting on Zoom. Participants have the ability to have their camera and mic unmuted, but just for the portion as I'm presenting, if you could just keep yourselves off camera and muted. We'll have time at the end for question and answers, and I'll even pause in between some of these sections as we move along here to see if there's anything in the chat box. So just make sure if anything pops into your head, feel free to put that into the chat box. Again, this is being recorded and it will be posted to our HISC webpage, which is the FY24 call for proposals for if you just need this as a reference tool, or maybe some of you folks missed the live webinar, you'll be able to view that on our webpage after this webinar. With that, we'll get rolling. So this is going to be very similar if you saw last year's FY23 webinar. It's pretty much the same format. We haven't changed too many things, but for those new applicants, it's just really great for them to be on the same page, and just a review for folks that have applied in the past. We'll be going over background of the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, talking in more detail about the funding priorities, an overview of the FY24 funding process. So I'll go over the timeline, that call for proposals, how evaluations work, the resources working group meeting, our Hawaii Invasive Species Council meeting, and then briefly touch on if you receive a HISC award, what to expect. And this should only take about 30 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. Again, right here, we have the HISC call for proposals webpage. So this has the full application guidelines. It also has the link to the application on there. So this is really your go-to webpage for all the information to put in your HISC application. And we really encourage applicants to read through those entire guidelines before filling out the application. Some background on the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. So the council was formed in 2003 by Hawaii Revised Statute 194. The purpose of the council is to provide interagency coordination and direction on invasive species issues in Hawaii. Each year, we receive funding through the state legislature that provides funding through the HISC to support projects and programs that they fill gaps between agency mandates and existing programs, and/or they advance our collective knowledge and tools through research and innovation. Our council is made up of 6 state departments that have some jurisdiction in invasive species work here in Hawaii. It is co-chaired by the current chairs of the Department of Land and Natural Resources and Department of Agriculture, and has voting representation from the Departments of Health, Transportation, Business Economic Development, and the University of Hawaii. We also have non-voting members. These are legislative members that have representation from each county, 1 representative and 1 senator from each county on our council. We also manage the implementation and tracking of the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan, which you can see right here. This was launched by the Department of Agriculture in 2017, and it's really our state guide to improving biosecurity here in Hawaii at the pre-border, border, post-border, and also with outreach and community engagement. It outlines 147 action items to address gaps and weaknesses in our biosecurity framework set across 10 years. Back in 2020, the Hawaii Invasive Species Council and the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species put together the 2025 Joint Strategy, which is in support of the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. And this joint strategy took priorities from the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan and really focused in on what do we want to accomplish and put our efforts towards accomplishing in the next 5 years. And this is really important because this is what our funding priorities are based on. They're based on the strategies outlined in the joint strategy. And I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail in just the next few slides. So you can see there are 5 funding priorities, and this is really where applications can get the most points, is if your project is working towards any of these funding strategies. So going into these funding priorities, you'll see that the first slide will give an overview of what this strategy is trying to achieve. And then the next slide is just some examples of actions that would fall under this priority. And they're not exclusive to those actions. So if you have something that doesn't really fit into those actions, but you think it falls under this strategy/funding priority, that is still justifiable. So priority 1 focuses on prevention and early detection, rapid response to new invasions. And this focuses on keeping terrestrial and aquatic invasive species threats from arriving and establishing in the state by identifying and addressing high-risk pathways and major modes of introduction, improving and continuing early detection and rapid response activities. And really key here is new is defined as a species not known to occur in the state. And the early detection and rapid response would focus on actions to prevent those new species introductions and establishment. So these would be species, say for instance, Africanized honeybees. Those are not known to occur in Hawaii. Red imported fire ants. So any of the actions or activities around those types of pests would fall under this funding priority. Here are some actions we can look at just to help as a reference guide when you're deciding whether or not your project contributes to this funding priority. And I'm not going to run through all of these. What you should know is these actions and definition of the strategy is on that webpage with the FY24 call for proposals, and it's also on the application. So there's going to be a section, which I'll show you in a little bit, on the application where it asks if your project is going to contribute to any of these funding priorities, and you can select yes or no. If you're selecting yes, you are asked to provide a short description of how your project contributes to that. So this can just help as a reference point as you're filling out that justification. And Chuck, was there anything in the chat I should check on or address before moving forward?
No, nothing in the chat yet. I just put the link to the HISC page for the call for proposals.
Perfect, thank you. Priority 2 is management of inter and intra-island movement of invasive species. So it sounds really similar to priority 1, but again, this focuses on keeping aquatic and terrestrial invasive species threats from spreading within Hawaii, identifying and addressing high-risk sources, pathways, major modes of introduction and spread, and then continuing improving early detection, rapid response for new populations and existing incipient populations of invasive species in Hawaii. So these can be pests that are known to occur here in Hawaii. It could be only on an island or in a county or maybe in just a section of the island. So all of those types of species would fall under this funding priority. And a lot of the work of the Island Invasive Species Committees that work on incipient target species across the islands would fall under this priority. Some examples, just a couple of things: identifies and implements cost-effective tools, technologies, and methods that improve management, conducting early detection surveys, even conducting legal review of policies related to inter and intra-island and suggest amendments to improve policies or regulations. So those are just a few examples. Priority 3 is implementation of large-scale control of widespread, high-impact invasive species. So this focuses on identifying, developing, and implementing new large-scale control or eradication projects for invasive species populations with highly significant ecological, economic, and/or health impacts in Hawaii. It builds momentum for action on other widespread, high-impact species. And really key here is widespread. So widespread indicates that typical mechanical, chemical controls or applications are not effective at reducing current population. And this funding priority really encourages new innovative tools and techniques for the control of these high impact widespread pests in Hawaii. This does not include classical biological control. That's because we have a separate funding priority specifically dedicated to classical biological control, which is going to be the next one I talk about. So when we're looking at this funding priority, some examples of projects that would fall under this are using native urchins to control invasive algae across the reefs. The work that's going on with protecting native forest birds from mosquito-borne diseases with the use of the incompatible insect technology, even the aerial development of managing for little fire ants over in Nahiku, Maui. These are all really great examples that would fall under this priority. So again, just some examples here. You can look to the web page, or even as you're moving through your application, you can find these examples on there. Developing and implementing community engagement plans or other communication strategies, that's a part of this. Plans and implements large-scale control projects, and then ensuring large-scale control impact is sustained through follow-up and monitoring. So just a few examples that go along with this funding priority. Our next funding priority is increasing Pacific regional biocontrol research and capacity. So this one focuses on classical biocontrol and research capacity in Hawaii, as well as the Pacific region. Classical biocontrol is the introduction of specialist natural enemies from the homeland of a pest of foreign origin. Continuing to make progress on existing biocontrol projects that includes all aspects from exploration to release. Some actions under this are continuing research into new biocontrol agents for invasive species. I know there's only a few agencies that are able to meet this one, but also in there is building and maintaining support for 21st century biocontrol practices. A lot of our partner agencies help support biocontrol messaging through their work. So this would definitely fall under some of those projects. And moving on to funding priority 5, this is maintaining an engaged and supportive community. It focuses on maintaining strong community support and mobilizing action on the strategies outlined in the HISC and CGAT's 2025 joint strategy. And if you're not familiar with the joint strategy, I highly recommend that you read through it just so you understand the specifics of each of those strategies, how they came about, and then there's also key actions related to those. And that's just a really great foundation as you move into putting in your application for HISC funding to have that information on hand. So some actions related to this funding priority, developing and distributing educational projects. This can be videos, brochures, posters, even going to events, coordinating on statewide and regional strategies and messages across lead agencies and partners, increasing the adoption of specific biosecurity behaviors at the ports of entry, even working with community volunteer groups to control invasive species. So just some examples of the actions that could fall under this funding priority. But again, if you have something that fits under the definition of this funding priority but isn't listed here, that's totally fine. These are not everything that we would find under this funding priority. And with that, I'll just take a pause and see if there's anything on the funding priorities, any clarification before I move forward. And folks, feel free to put, if you're online, feel free to put any questions in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask me.
Nothing in the chat yet, Chelsea, other than the links I've added.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move into our HISC funding timeline for this year. As you all know, you probably got the HISC email out to the listserv, making you aware of the call for proposals. So the application was put onto that webpage this Monday, May 1st. We're doing this informational webinar today. And the deadline for applications is about a month, so they'll be due Friday, June 2nd at 5 p.m. After that, we compile all the applications and get them ready to be sent out to our evaluators, which are the members of our resources working group. That will happen June 13th. And then about the same timeline, about a month to perform the evaluations. We have those due July 14th. We were actually able to get a date for our resources working group meeting. That is going to be August 3rd at 8:30 a.m. And then our council meeting has yet to be determined. And I'm going to go over each of these steps in a little bit more detail if you're unfamiliar with the working group and the meetings. So the deadline, FY24 proposals are due June 2nd, 2023 at 5 p.m. Late submissions may or may not be accepted at the discretion of HISC staff. Eligibility, so the eligible entities include state and county agencies, including those in the UH system, and federal agencies partnering with the state agencies on issues relevant to Hawaii. Public universities and other US states are also eligible if working on issues of concern to Hawaii. Proposed projects should be for novel research or interagency collaborations. It's just a reminder, these funds are not for regular departmental functions. When it comes to submitting more than one proposal, a single entity may submit multiple funding proposals. Applicants working in multiple project areas are encouraged to submit separate applications where possible. A lot of labs have multiple projects going on within those. So it definitely makes sense to split up those proposals into those projects into multiple applications. A lot of the larger programmatic asks that come from the Island Invasive Species Committees, it makes sense for them to break up their outreach, maybe from their regular field operations. And that's actually really helpful for the evaluators when they're going through and reading through the goals and the deliverables. It just streamlines that process, and it also helps with the justifications and scoring out the funding priorities. So it really helps if it makes sense for your projects to separate them into different proposals. Applicant type, there's projects versus programs. So in the past, it has been difficult to weigh the value of the small one-time projects against the large multifaceted programs that apply for funding each year. So to address this, evaluators will consider these two types of applications separately during the scoring process, comparing small projects with other small projects and large programs with other large programs. Programs are defined by across the submitted applications. If the total requested for all those applications is 300,000 or more, that qualifies you as a program. So that's definitely some of the island invasive species committees. I mean, that's the biggest separation between the smaller research projects and other asks. Yes, we have another new platform for our applications. So last year we were using SurveyMonkey. I know there were some issues with that, but we also just let our registration lapse on that. So we are now using Google Forms. The formatting and the questions are similar to last year's application. It's still a really straightforward, easy to use application. And I even feel like some of the issues that were encountered were SurveyMonkey are, we have solutions to that with Google Forms. So straight from the Google Forms, it automatically saves your progress for 30 days when you're signed into your Google account, so you can work across devices or take a break without losing a step. So when you're pressing next to move on to the next page, it will save your progress on that. But that is if you're signed into a Google account. I actually never checked if you could do that if you're signed into a hawaii.gov or another type of email account. So I would say when you're filling out your application, to use a Google account or your hawaii.edu account to do your application. If you want to have a different email, so when we contact you as we're moving through the funding process, there is a question on there that asks you for your email address. So just put the email address that you want to be contacted at as we move through this funding process, and we'll make sure to take that into account. But I think for the ability to save progress, try to use your Google accounts or your hawaii.edu accounts. If you don't have that option, I always like to say, have your narrative and those larger texts on a Word doc just as a backup. So you have that information and you can copy and paste it and maybe fill your application out all at one time, and you don't have to worry about going back to your application at a later date in case it wasn't saved. Once you do submit it, you will receive an email to whatever email you submitted the application with, and it actually contains your completed application. So that was something we had issues with SurveyMonkey in the past, but you will get your full completed application emailed back to your account once you've submitted that, which is, I think, is a really great step. If you have any issues, you lose your application, it doesn't send you an email, my contact information is on that web page. So just contact me at any time and we can go on the back end and make sure we can pull up your application or help you out with any steps. So online application, again, it's hosted by Google Forms. This is the application link, which is on the website right now. It's broken into different components: your project information, the narrative, applicability to the FY24 funding priorities, project reporting and outcomes, your budget, if you have any leveraged funding, and then just make sure to review your application before you submit it. And of course, always before you submit it, we have a section where you can put any comments either on the application or the process that can really help us and inform how we do things differently next year if we need to. Let's see if this will just take me to where I want to go. So here is the application. Again, it's very straightforward, very similar to last year. Just gives you an introduction, a summary of each of the funding priorities. Here's the link to the FY24 call for proposals webpage, which actually has the full application guidelines, just some considerations. And this is where, if you're using your Google account and say you want it to go to, you know, a .gov account or something that's not Google supported, you can put that email in there. Let's see, we'll just do. So you put in your basic information. This is the first part, invasive species, your agency, the total requested amount, and then either your name or whoever is the lead that we should be in contact with throughout the funding process. So just make sure you have a representative listed there. If you have any additional partner agencies involved in the project, if you don't have any agencies you want to list, just put NA in there. And your project start time, your end or proposed end, and then you just click next. So this will take you through, you can add your executive summary, your narrative. I'm just gonna do. Is this proposal part of a multi-year project? So is it a continuing proposal or a continuation of work funded by HISC in FY23? You just select yes or no. If you select yes, we just want you to list your the deliverables achieved thus far. We know that these FY23 funds, some of the accounts have yet to be even set up. So you can just briefly list or just say none so far because account is not set up. So that's totally fine. Moving on to the next. So again, here's a link to the HISC 2025 HISC and CGAP's joint strategy and the biosecurity plan if you want to look through this. This then takes you into applicability into those funding priorities. So here you're just going to select, hey, does this project meet funding priority number 1? Oh, what was that again? Oh, that's the new species. Okay, I don't work on any new species. So you could say no, and then you can move on to the next one. So this will go through each of the funding priorities. There's also a section for the budget that you fill in, leverage funding, and then you can click submit. So again, it's a really easy to use application form. Once you go through the entire application and you do the final submission, you should get an email with your full application, so you can keep that on your files. Okay, with that, I will just pause right there and see if there's any questions about the application.
Nothing in the chat yet.
Great. All right. So evaluations, we send evaluations around June 13th. So that's all the applications get packaged up together. Proposals are evaluated by members of the HISC Resources Working Group. Members were designated by the council 2 years ago. So these are representatives from these are staffers from each of the represented state departments on our council. Evaluators' scores are based on a proposal's ability to address each of the 5 funding priorities that I went over earlier. There are additional points available for leverage funding and then relevancy to sectors. From that, a quantitative score for each proposal provides a ranking to determine recommended award amounts that are discussed at the Resources Working Group meeting. Just to review some changes to scoring, this is pretty much the same as last year. We made these changes last year, but I just want to put this as reminders to folks that maybe missed last year or just completely new to this process or just need a reminder. So there are no additional points for the inclusion of a management plan or strategy. There is the ability to upload any relevant documents that may be useful during the evaluation process, though they are not required. And the points for a management plan or strategy were just really minimal anyways. So we're just kind of getting rid of that altogether. The HISC support staff will determine each proposal's relevancy to sectors. Those sectors, if you remember, and if you did applications in the past, we had this as part of the application as a question for those applicants to select which sectors their projects are relevant to. And there's 6 of them: natural resources, agriculture, economy, transportation, human health, research, and technology. So HISC support staff will assign points accordingly for consistency and to assist with the assigning of proposals to evaluators. There's 6 points total that are possible. And the last change that we made last year is proposals that score low based on the quantitative evaluations will not be recommended for FY24 HISC funding, and thus will not be part of the resources working group discussion. This threshold for low scoring proposals, that can only be determined once all proposals are scored. This is a reminder that award amounts are based primarily on submitted proposals and not the discussion at the resources working group meeting. The resources working group meeting is a forum for evaluators to ask applicants for clarification and their application and to come to a consensus on a recommended budget. And I will go into the resources working group, I think, on the next slide here. So we scheduled the resources working group meeting for August 3rd at 8:30 a.m. This meeting, we invite all applicants or representatives of the applicant to come to this meeting, either in person or virtually. This meeting is really focused on drafting the recommended FY24 HISC budget. It's primarily a discussion amongst members of the resources working group. Those members may ask applicants questions about their proposal during the meeting. At the end, the resources working group will vote to approve the recommended budget. And once again, applicants are welcome to attend in person or virtually. For in-person attendance, it will be held at the Department of Land and Natural Resources boardroom, which is located at the Kalani Moku building on Punch Bowl Street. And I'll make sure this all will be announced through the HISC listserv, and also I'll make updates to the FY24 call for proposals webpage with information on that. And we'll also provide a Zoom link for those that would like to attend virtually. And this meeting starting at 8:30 a.m. I think last year we ended around noon, so I'm hoping we can stick to that timeline and not have these 8-hour meetings anymore, which can be very grueling for everybody. The Hawaii Invasive Species Council meeting will be scheduled shortly after the resources working group meeting. So this is a public meeting. It has to meet sunshine law requirements. And this is where our council, we present the recommended budget on behalf of the resources working group. So this will be presented by HISC staff and usually the resources working group chair. And we go through each awarded project and even the non-awarded projects and present those to our council, answer any questions, and ask for approval of the recommended budget from the council. You have the ability to attend in person or virtually. Again, this is subject to sunshine law requirements, and with sunshine law, they're still allowing for hybrid meetings to occur, which is really great. This one, you'll want to make sure you are subscribed to the HISC listserv if you're not already, because that is how this announcement will come out about the date and details on the meeting. So moving into awarded projects, I'm just going to touch on this briefly, but it will help you to be aware. And also if you're planning your budget, you can kind of know the length of time to plan for. So if you do receive a HISC award, we will send an announcement to those awardees with your final award amount and asking for a best and final offer. This needs to be sent to myself and also your PI to review before finalizing it for signatures. The final proposals will get sent to myself and your PI for signature. We obligate funds onto a purchase order. The final purchase order goes to your agency, and your agency sets up its own spending account. And if you are a state department, we're able to do journal vouchers, which just kind of move funding from one department to another department. So we don't have to follow the same purchase order process that we have to do for University of Hawaii projects. You can start your project. To start your project, the dates are flexible, but they cannot extend beyond 2 fiscal years. So especially for University of Hawaii projects for FY24, you could start as early as fall 2023, which I really recommend folks getting their BAFOs and getting that process started as early as possible. And they can be extended up to March 31, 2025. Basically, it works, your agency pays you and then bills us for the reimbursement. So that concludes everything I wanted to discuss today through this webinar. We went over the background, the funding priorities, and an overview of, the FY24 funding process. And right now we got plenty of time to take any questions. You have my email here. So if questions come up during the application process, just feel free to reach out to me at any time, just so we can help smooth things along. And then below there, that's the HISC mailing list. So you can subscribe to that if you aren't already. Folks have any questions? See some familiar names.
Chelsea, the video recording of this webinar will be posted on the HISC YouTube channel. Is that correct?
We'll have it on the HISC YouTube channel, and then we'll put that link onto that FY24 call for proposals webpage too. So you can find it in those 2 places. The more direct route would be just going to the YouTube page.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop recording. So aloha, everybody that is viewing this recording. Thank you.